You want to go pro in Fortnite Chapter 4. This is the advice, the unfiltered advice that you absolutely need in order to achieve that. Watch this video to the end and be patient with me because this is a very important message that I must put out to everyone who has a goal or an aspiration to become a pro in Fortnite Chapter 4. Oftentimes this can be seen as a fresh start because we have a new map, because there's a new meta, because there's new guns, and you're absolutely right. We do have new things to learn, and this is an opportunity because all the pros and all the tier 2s and tier 3s and everyone else who is competing has to deal with this fresh start too, which puts you on equal footing to actually win the race to becoming amazing at this game. Now let's test if you were paying attention. There's something absolutely wrong with what I just said, which will lead into the first topic of this video. What I just said is that there's a fresh start, right? Because there's a new map, new guns, you're on equal footing with the pros. This is absolutely not true. There are certain skills that carry over from chapter to chapter, regardless of the map, that you must learn and get good at, and these skills are the reason why you see the same pros placing at the top over and over. These carryover skills are what I like to call the fundamentals of the game. Guns are not a fundamental of the game. Map isn't really a fundamental of the game. You can get used to this very, very quickly, right? What are the fundamentals of the game? This will be the first topic of today's video. Later on, I also want to address how to practice properly and also how to develop a really good intuition, which is something that carries a lot of the pros, because oftentimes when you ask the pros to explain a concept or try to explain what they're doing, they're unable to. And the reason is because their intuition is what carries them, not anything else. So let's talk about it. Now, why should we know the fundamentals of the game? What good does it do us, right? If we have a limited amount of time per day to practice, it's very important we prioritize. And so what should we prioritize? There are certain skills that give you a bigger ROI than other skills, right? And so for that reason, it's very important for us to know what are the big ROI skills and what are the skills that we should absolutely avoid and not really spend all that time with. So let's answer the golden question. What are the fundamentals of Fortnite? Aim is one of the most important skills that you must absolutely master before you can sort of worry about anything else. Like, make sure you can hit a reliable shot. Now notice I don't say hit a 180 or 190 or 200 all the time. It's like if you can trade 100 damage every time you're given an opportunity to do so, you're probably good enough. It's important not to hit nothing. Like, every time you're given an opportunity, if you can trade a good amount of damage and not hit 0 or 30, you'll be well off for sure. Like, this is good. Back in the day when Tayson was super good in his prime, biggest reason why he was super good was because his aim was super reliable. Next skill that we must talk about, which is absolutely a fundamental, is your edit accuracy. So this is something that I absolutely want you guys to focus on because this is something that you don't really care about in practice. Everyone's trying to go as fast as they can. Everyone cares about how speedy or flashy or cool they look in practice. When you're doing Raiders Piece Control map, it's really the percentage of times you mess up that matters, not really how fast you do it. Again, going back to Tayson, he was a slow builder back in the day. He was a slow editor back in the day, right? He didn't really edit that fast. The key thing was he would never miss an edit, right? And so that's what's really important. If you understand how to peek and move, then really all that matters is like, do not miss an edit. If you really care about time and trying to do things efficiently, one of the best ways to edit slowly is messing up an edit. It adds like a whole 2 seconds to your sort of editing time, right? So if you care about speed, the best thing you can actually do is up your percentage of time where you actually hit the edit correctly. The third skill that I really want you to work on, but this is something that's very deep, this takes a long time to get really good at, and oftentimes is tied to experience, is your game sense, right? Game sense can be broken down into two sort of categories, which is fighting game sense and your scrim game sense, as I like to call it. I don't really know another term for it, but essentially your off-spawn planning, your mid-game rotates, and your sort of game sense revolving around that, and your end-game game sense overall. And so, let's break that down, right? So fighting game sense is essentially your movement, your peaks, your trading, and your ability to know when to go in, when to go out, when to play with your team, when to sort of split up and do a pinch, and all of these things, right? And so it's really important to understand these things can take a long time to get good at, but only if you let it happen that way. One of the best ways to get better at fighting super quickly is to often refer back to the correct way to fight. So how do you know what the right way to do it? Obviously I talk a lot about on my channel, the concepts of fighting, but another really simple way to remember how to fight properly is to go on Twitch and watch some streamers and watch how they play Soul Arena and things like that, right? So Clarity G, Joji, these people are really good, and so you could refer to them and make sure you're on the right path, because there is absolutely a way where you could sort of veer off to the side and build bad habits and forget to keep yourself in check. As for scrim game sense, like if you don't have a popular scrim chord that you play in and that that offers scrims almost every day, Noble is really good in EU. Manu scrims, so Vital scrims, is really good in NA. These are really good recommendations in order to get good. If you guys have other scrim chords that you want to sort of share with the community, put them down in the comments. Absolutely. But scrim often experience is one of those things that builds really good scrim game sense, right? Some of the other concepts that I can talk about is understand the order of priorities, right? So if there is surge in your game, then you should deal with that first. Building positioning is really important, right? And so ask yourself, like, do you want to go end zone? Do you want to go center zone? Which is important based on the situation that you're in. Can you even go to center zone? Because oftentimes people will force center zone when it's not forceable and then die or lose a lot of mats because of it, when it was just better that game because they late rotated in to just play edge and rotate in at a later time when there's more enemy builds to use as cover, right? So it really does depend on the situation, but this is what it is, right? A lot of game sense is intuition, which is a topic we'll talk about later in the video, but I really want you guys to understand it's pattern recognition, right? Put it simply, if you're in a scenario, very simple scenario where you die, it's often the case that you'll eventually learn, maybe not the first or second or third time, but eventually with enough focused reps in scrim, you will eventually learn what the mistake is and let it go. But this is actually very common with easy mistakes that you eventually let it go, right? Like, for example, not having a shotgun shell in your shotgun when you're fighting, and so therefore the fix would be to start reloading more frequently so that you do have a shotgun shell when you fight, so that when you're in an engagement, you actually are ready to shoot. So this is a very simple example, right? This is very easy to fix because it's very obvious what the problem is, but in more complex situations where it requires more logical thought and critical thinking, this is where the issue lies. So obviously, pattern recognition only works if you actually take the time to sort of review and actually come up with the logical answer to the problem that you presented. And so, like, for example, if you're in a scrim and you keep dying endgame and it seems to be the same way, maybe you're running out of mats too soon in first moving or second moving, and you're having trouble identifying the problem, right? And so this is where oftentimes game sense will require one of two things. The first thing is usually, just you identifying the issue successfully and solving it. But sometimes you'll be in a situation where you don't have the knowledge to solve it, and maybe this is a problem you get stuck at often. This is where a new perspective can help you. Either a friend or a coach or someone knowledgeable about the game can come in and review your game for you and tell you exactly what's going wrong. Because oftentimes, the problem is either too complex for you to solve it, or you're just not able to figure out what's going wrong, right? Regardless, these are all the problems that come up with game sense when you're actually trying to solve them. And what's important to recognize is, like, yes, it's a slow process, and yes, it's very easy to solve the simple stuff, right? I genuinely believe most of you guys can solve the simple stuff yourself. Like, hey, I'm too low here and I should have healed instead of fighting. Like, that's a very basic issue to solve. But like, when it gets a little bit more complex, when it gets to like end game or mid game rotates, and this is where it starts to become a little bit, troublesome, this is where you'll probably need a lot more critical thinking to solve the issue, and a lot more logical thought, in my personal opinion. So before ending off this first section, I do want to let you in on a little bit of a secret. This will help you greatly in terms of trying to analyze, hey, did I do this right? Did I do this wrong? And like, how should I fix it? Whenever you're VOD reviewing, try your absolute best to not fall into the trap of results-based thinking, because Fortnite is absolutely a risk-reward game. Sometimes you do take the risk that you're supposed to, and it doesn't work out. Just because you lost that game doesn't mean you shouldn't do it again in a future game. For example, if you're low mats in first moving, second moving, and you try to go for something bold, maybe you could have done it slightly differently, sure, but it's very important to recognize that, like, hey, it's much better to go for something when you're low mats than it's just not to go for something at all, right? So try your very best to not look at just results and think like, hey, is this right or wrong based on whether I lost or won, right? And I think it's really important to recognize that logical thinking trumps here, right? Because sometimes you did do the right move, but it still fails. This is not a large majority of cases, but it's important to recognize when this is, and it's important to understand, hey, like, I took the risk that was necessary, I did what I needed to do, and it didn't work out. Like, for example, sometimes in a very big height meta, it's important to go for height. Maybe 1 out of 4 games that you go for height, you die, trying to go for height, but then the 3 other games you absolutely play it well. Understand that risk is a big part of Fortnite, and it should absolutely be used. If you try to think of things way too logically and sort of step by step in Fortnite, I honestly believe that you'll just be too scared to go for anything, and that's not good either, right? So take your decisions with risk reward in mind. For the second topic of this video, I do want to talk about your mentality when you practice. It's important to understand that a lot of people give the advice of, hey, I want to be patient, I really think it's a long-term game, and even I've given this advice to myself, but what I do to my students is I tell them, look, although you should be patient, here's something that you should know. Problem with being patient and too patient at times is that there's no sense of urgency. Now, this is the key lesson of today's video, is the urgency of your practice will lead to great results. Have you ever wondered why it's so hard to play Soul Arena at times? You have to recognize, this is not some to-do list that I'm giving you. This is not some sort of chore that you have to do. Let's quickly compare, going pro in Fortnite with a very simple example, which is how to get good grades on a math test, which is, very similar in the regard of you're getting good at something, okay? Your teacher gives you a practice set of problems, which is very, very similar to the test, and often it's actually the exact same thing as the test, except they give you different numbers, for example, to truly test whether you know the problems and whether you can apply the concepts, that you learned in class. And so the best way to get a really, really, really good performance on your math test is to not actually just complete the math test that you got as a sort of practice sample set, right? Don't just go through the motions. You do it, and then you don't stop practicing until you get every question right without looking at the answers. And then after you can actually complete the problems, you're supposed to redo them and make sure you can actually do them within the sort of supposed allotted time that you're given during the math test, right? These are the steps that you do in order to get a good grade. School is actually really easy, right? In that regard. It's only really easy if you actually check whether you're ready. So that's the key thing, right? Make sure you're ready. That's what I was sort of talking about earlier. It's you guys are sort of autopiloting through Soul Arena because it's some sort of to-do list. Oh, I should play Soul Arena in order to be ready for tournaments. But no one actually looks at what's happening to them in Soul Arena and feels any sort of stress or worry that they're going to do bad in tournaments. That's the sort of problem. Is go into Soul Arena, every time you die, actually go into replays. I know 95% of you guys watching this video don't go into replays and go check your result or why you died in the fight. No one does it. I promise you. I'm so aware of this. You guys genuinely need to go actually figure out why you died, fix it, don't stop until you fix it, and then when you're dropping 10 to 15 kills in Soul Arena, no problem, because your win rate in each fight is insanely high. That's when you can sort of stop and be hey, my individual fighting is pretty good. I feel in a duo setting now, I can actually carry my own weight and not let my teammate down. This is very important. So the lesson that we've learned is quite simply checking whether you're actually ready for the tournaments, right? It's if you're losing every scrim, what do you think's gonna happen in the tournament? That's doing the math practice set problems, getting every question wrong, and then going to sleep peacefully somehow. One final thing I'll say about this topic before we move on to the third one in this video is I'm fully aware that rage is an issue in Soul Arena most likely, but also in scrims, right? And so how do you fix the rage issue? My personal shot at this, honestly, is the fact that you should just genuinely realize how much time is being wasted through the raging. It doesn't offer anything productive if you're getting off every 2 to 3 fights in Soul Arena, and if you're just checked out after 2 scrims. This is the important thing, right? If you're trying to be the productive person that you want to be, and you're trying to solve all your issues before the tournament comes around, it's in your best interest not to rage. Be mad for your 5 to 10 to 20 seconds, and then get over it. That's it. I don't know what else to tell you. You need to control yourself and just actually focus on the task at hand. Now, finally, the third and arguably the most important topic of this video is about intuition. Now, for those of you guys who don't know what intuition is, let me sort of explain it to you 2 different ways. First, the definition of intuition. Intuition is simply knowing what to do without actually consciously thinking about it, and this is actually made only possible by pattern recognition from past experiences, usually a similar past experience, okay? So this is very important. Before we move on, I just want to quickly explain why intuition is such a valuable skill, especially in a game like Fortnite. Number one reason is absolutely speed, right? When you consciously think about every single decision and why you're making the decision in game, you're struggling with speed. You're trying to do things too slow. You're hesitating. You're doubting yourself. This is not good. You might be second guessing yourself. It's very important. You need speed in a game like Fortnite, especially when it comes to end game and even some mid game rotates, honestly, right? And so it's very important that you need to come to a feeling, not a logical thought in this scenario, especially when in performance like a tournament, right? You need speed at times, and it's very, very valuable to come up with a decent decision with speed rather than hesitate on the really, really good decision or the correct answer theoretically. If you've ever wondered why we practice or scrim at all, this is exactly why. We're trying to create those memories or past experience so that in the future when we go into the tournament and a similar memory arises, what do you think we're going to do? We've learned our lesson. We don't like losing. We've lost 3 times, 4 times in a row in the past to this exact same mistake, and usually I would hope that we don't make the same mistake in the tournament. Another way to think about intuition is an example. So if you guys still don't understand what intuition is, not to worry. Here's a great example of intuition in our day-to-day life. When you're walking, do you actually think about left foot forward, right foot forward, left foot forward, right foot forward? No, you don't. You don't. You just don't think of it that way, right? You think of just, hey, I need to go from point A to point B, because in our head it's modularized, right? And we thought about it when we were kids, like, okay, how do I actually walk? For sure, we thought about it then. So in practice, in getting better at it, you need to think about it consciously. But when you're actually good at it already, you don't think about it anymore. It becomes intuition. Another example of this is if you're a driver, right? So most of you guys, maybe you don't have your driver's license yet. I totally understand that. But let's say you're driving a car. Why do you brake? Why do you slow down the car when it comes down to the situation where the car in front of you has their brake lights on? Sometimes your mind is focused on something else, and you're talking to your friend on the phone, and you'll still brake and slow down when you see the brake lights in front of you appear. So again, this is intuition. Because you've been in this sort of scenario before where maybe in driving school or practice, you've been in a situation where the brake lights in front of you has happened and the car is slowly approaching you because it's slowing down and you're still going at a rapid speed, you'll press the brake, right? But during practice, it requires some conscious thought, and eventually you learn. And you have to understand Fortnite is genuinely no different. Just because it's a video game doesn't mean it's any different. You have to understand. Think about driving as if it's like a video game. Like the windshield is a monitor, the driving wheel is a controller. It's the exact same thing. We have a reaction to some sort of thing that we observe on the monitor, and that's it, right? And so this is the exact same thing that we're doing here as well. If we practice enough, we'll eventually run into most of the most common scenarios enough where we'll just eventually get good, right? Wrong. That's probably not going to happen. And the reason why it won't happen is, it's not that simple. You can't just get good. You have to sort of consciously think while you're practicing. This is why I oftentimes suggest to review and reflect and think about what you did wrong and try to figure out what you did wrong, because I think it's really important. Because, like, for example, if I were to sit in the call with you and try to like tell you exactly what you did wrong and I just take over the whole process for you, you don't have to do any of the thinking, which is oftentimes somewhat painful, and people don't like to do it. People are lazy. I totally get it. But it's important to recognize this is the process that actually sort of puts it into memory for you, right? So trying to think of what went wrong, if you are able to figure it out yourself, you'll probably remember it easier. Make sense? So like, why do you think the teachers don't give you the answer in math class? It's the exact same reason. They're trying to get it sort of locked in your memory. And if you have the process of figuring it out and you get it successfully, you'll probably remember it much easier during the test. And in this case, during your scrim, I want you to figure it out for yourself, because the critical thinking process is really important for remembering it later on in the game. Oftentimes when I'm coaching, I like to ask a lot of questions rather than just tell them straight up what the answer is, right? I like to lead or guide them to the answer, not just give them the answer. And so this is really important, guys. This is what intuition is, right? And so it's important to recognize what intuition is, because if you, like if you're thinking about the pros, when they're going into a very, very crazy situation, like an end game clutch, they're not there thinking like, oh my God, what's the risk reward of this situation? Like, and what should I do here? And, sometimes they won't even think about like anything. They'll just be locked in. Right, that's what locked in means, right? The adrenaline is rushing. They don't have time to think consciously. All they're doing is referring back to their past experiences in their head, using that to come up with decisions, and that's it. Like, quite literally, that's it. Like, even myself, someone who I would argue is more logical, if I'm in a solo clutch situation and I'm trying to clutch it up for my team, I don't think. In game, I don't think. In practice, I might try to consciously think, because I think that's necessary for building that intuition faster, but in the tournament, I just go locked in, right? That's really, really important to recognize. Don't try to overthink in tournaments. I've tried it myself in the past. It is absolutely not a great idea if you don't have the time to come up with the decisions, right? Obviously, in mid-game, Mid game, coming up with the rotates and stuff, sure, because you have the time for it, right? But in end game, you absolutely don't have time for it. Some rotates, honestly, you don't have time for it. Let's say you need surge, right? You need a lot of surge. Spend all that time trying to get all that AR damage or the surge damage in general, and then later on you have like 10 seconds to figure out your mid-game rotate, and that's it. Like in that case, you have to refer to your intuition, which is oftentimes IGLs and coaches are not the exact same thing, because coaches sometimes need more time to come up with the correct answer, whereas IGLs are really, really good with coming up with an answer on the spot that's half decent or 80% good. And that is way more valuable than coming up with the actual correct answer, which kind of leads me into the last subtopic. Be a little bit more confident about your calls. It's okay if you don't get the number one correct answer. I'm not asking you to actually do that. You just need to have good quality decisions, and that's it, right? Sometimes, honestly, if you make a bad decision but both of you guys are in on it, it can work, right? So just understand whatever play you make, just make it together with confidence, and most of the time it will actually work, which is why sometimes when you VOD review pros, they'll do something theoretically wrong, but it still works out because they're so confident in their play. Like they'll go in on it together, right? And so that's key. That's very, very important. Do not sort of be split on decisions. There's the whole reason you have an IGL. Listen to the IGL. Obviously, the fragger can make a call here or there, but it's important to just stick to one call and be on it 100%. Before we end this video, let's give a couple examples of Fortnite in-game intuition. Okay? Very simple example. I'm in front of this box. What am I very scared of if there's an enemy in here? My positioning is horrible, that's first off, but I don't think of it this way. What I see is I'm adjacent to a wall that's not mine. This wall is a part of a full box. Naturally, I would think there's someone in there, and because that's the case, I would immediately get out of the way because I'm under threat being full box. And so that's the key word right there, right? Is threat. Absolutely, you need to understand that threat is sort of the feeling that you get when you try to come up with the correct answer using intuition. Either way, guys, sort of a different video here. I did not want to make that sort of algorithmic chapter 4 content. This is why I was sort of struggling on like making content in general, is because I don't want to shitpost. I don't want to make that sort of content that you see everywhere on YouTube. I want to be different, not for the sake of being different, but for the sake of actually helping you guys genuinely, right? And for the guys that actually care about this the most, and actually care about competitive and care about improving and actually, have a goal of becoming a pro one day, this video will absolutely be the resource that you need to get better. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys next time.